This week abroad, Trinidadian economy worsens as its energy sector struggles.
Maduro is not just a bad leader, he is now a dictator.
Nicolas Maduro comes under fire from international leaders, and a Chinese politician falls from grace following corruption investigations. Welcome to This Week Abroad. I'm Andrew Laidley. Let's start with some of the major business news stories from across the region. Illegal gold digging has become a nuisance for the Belizean Authority. Just this week, 2 Guatemalans were arrested after being found with ammunition, a bag with marijuana, and an assortment of tools for gold panning. Friends for Conservation and Development (FCD) is arguing that if the Belizean government doesn't get the Guatemalans to stop, soon there will be no gold in the region for Belize.
The 2 that were detained, just over the weekend on Saturday, they basically the patrol went in at 3 o'clock in the morning. By the time they reached to the site, they already dropped on the camp by 7 o'clock, and that's when these guys were still asleep. So they had been basically operating the night or getting ready then really to depart from the zone. So they were resting. And so it's changing the tactics over the last couple of weeks that we basically were bringing Guatemalans almost every 2 days by 4s or by 3s and so. But Guatemalans still don't stop. They still continue. My feeling is that unless we change and unless we are, much more abrupt and much more effective in our works down there, to be able to contain it, the Guatemalans will not stop until the gold is finished in that zone.
As Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro celebrates victory over an election for a constituent assembly, other countries have come out to criticize the results and the process. The United States is leading condemnation against Nicolas Maduro, calling him a dictator and freezing his assets inside the U.S. Al Jazeera's Lucia Newman reports from Caracas.
A vigil for the more than 120 people who have died in Venezuela's anti-government protests. 10 of them during Sunday's Constitutional Assembly elections, widely regarded as an assault on democracy.
The assembly process was a constitutional fraud, and nobody on the planet fell for it.
The White House announced it's freezing all of Maduro's assets in the U.S., assuming he has any.
Maduro is not just a bad leader, he is now a dictator.
The sanctions fell far short of banning Venezuela's oil imports, as some had predicted, and which most government opponents believe would have been counterproductive.
It would produce a sort of blockade, and then the culprits of our misfortune would be caused by others, and not the illegitimate actions of our perverse government.
With the election out of the way, President Nicolás Maduro is set to go after his enemies in the opposition-controlled National Assembly. But his first target will be this woman, former ally Luisa Ortega, the Attorney General, who he now lambasts as a traitor.
What do you think the Constituent Assembly should do with the Attorney General? Restructure it and immediately declare a state of emergency and take control of justice.
Knowing that the clock is ticking fast, Ortega delivered an ominous message to Venezuelans.
With this assembly, we will now see absolute power fall into the hands of the minority that will permanently do away with the right to vote. No more elections, perpetuity in power without any separation of powers.
Although government opponents vow to keep resisting, the all-powerful Constitutional Assembly will soon be a reality. It's clearly no longer a matter of if, but when. It won't be long now before President Nicolás Maduro will be able to eliminate the last of the institutional obstacles to what the Attorney General calls absolute power without control. A power that Maduro says will cement a socialist revolution, while these Venezuelans brace themselves for the installation of the assembly later this week. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Caracas.
Guyana could start using the Chinese yuan currency soon. This after the yuan was endorsed by the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry (GCCI) as a way to lure investors to Guyanese shores. It's a part of a wider conversation to start using the yuan currency in the Caribbean. President of the GCCI says it will be a good move for Guyana as the country is currently having problems with the U.S. currency.
The transactional benefits will be that, it will, since we've been having issues with U.S. currency, we were back maybe 2-3 months ago, if you have a situation where businesses are invoiced in Guyana in the Chinese yuan, well then we'll have to find that in our local banking system to remit that money to Chinese suppliers. If they bill you in such a form, they have to bill you in yuan, and then you will be able to send them back that. So they mean there will have to be a currency, a build-up here. There will have to be some reserves here. And if the situation pans out that you will have to pay in Chinese yuan, well then it might be on a transactional level able to offset some of the demand for U.S. currency.
He says if the currency is introduced, there's a likelihood that the cost of living for Guyanese will improve, although that's dependent on market trading.
From the Chamber's perspective, if the currency comes in and the difference between the transactional cost between finding currency in the Chinese yuan as against the U.S. currency, and your bills are, the cost of goods go down, your cost of purchasing going down, well, it will benefit Guyanese, but that will be market determined, as every day those rates change. Every day they change as you go along. So from a standpoint, now you can't look into the future and say it will be beneficial or not. It depends on the strength of the currency or the weakness of the currency. I would not worry too much about that, though.
Discussions are currently underway with the Caribbean Development Bank to have the currency introduced to the region. A local economist in Grenada is not in agreement with the general belief that reviving the agriculture sector will benefit Grenada's economy.
Too many people are talking about agriculture. Agriculture will not solve Grenada's problem. It could help. We are too small. Bearing in mind, Grenada is 133 square miles. The smallest U.S. state, I think, is Rhode Island. If I am not mistaken, Rhode Island has 1,154 square miles. Agriculture is not the solution.
He says there are other viable ways to grow the Grenadian economy.
One of the main solutions is to find alternative sources of revenue other than selling citizenship to foreign people. I am not going down that road at all. And I have already identified a future source of revenue, but I will not talk about it today.
Up next, is the economic outlook for Trinidad and Tobago as gloomy as some say? We'll find out after the break. Welcome back to This Week Abroad. The Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, CBTT, confirmed that economic activity in the Twin Island Republic has remained restrained in the first quarter of 2017. The bank noted that the energy sector output, in particular oil and natural gas production, has not yet started to recover strongly. This Week Abroad, we speak with Deputy Head of Business News at Trinidad Guardian newspaper, Andre Worrell. Thank you so much for speaking with me here on This Week Abroad, Andre.
Sure.
On the back of the CBTT's recent announcement on economic activity in the country, what is the state of the economy in Trinidad right now?
Well, the central bank is correct. Economic activity is relatively flat. We expect that to change going into the second half of this year and certainly in the last quarter. There isn't as much commercial activity taking place. A lot of companies are actually offering voluntary separation packages to their employees. So the effects of the economic contraction are really setting in. That's just the reality of the situation in the economy right now. As far as different sectors are concerned, as you would be well aware, the energy sector has always been the primary driver of resources, of revenue in TNT. The energy sector is down for two reasons. One, the global prices have come down significantly. since 2014, and also there's been a production decline in Trinidad. So the volumes of oil and gas that we once produced have been down dramatically. In terms of gas in particular, which is really the main profit center for generating tax revenue for the government and for adding to the foreign exchange in Trinidad, there's a huge shortfall of gas to the industrial estates. So that has affected the methanol companies and some of the other petrochem companies. So there's a sort of spiderweb effect. When one area goes down, the ripple effect on other areas is real. So that's where we are. The financial sector is pretty healthy still. There's still about $3 billion of excess liquidity in the financial system in TNT, which is good. So the banks remain strong, they remain well capitalized. Obviously, their loan loss provisions have increased because you have people losing their jobs, businesses are contracting, and business revenues are down generally.
And how has the country been coping with this kind of economic dullness? Is there a safety net in place for this kind of activity?
Yes, so we have buffers, fortunately. One of the buffers that we have is the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, which is effectively our country's savings at a national level, right? Fortunately, some money exists there, just about 5.7 billion US in buffer in saved resources. Excuse me. The government dipped into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund earlier this year, where they took out about $360 million US to finance part of their budget. Also, what the government has been doing is selling assets, state assets. So some of the companies that they have an interest in, like First Citizens Bank and TTNGL, Trinidad and Tobago Natural Gas Liquids Company, they did additional offering of shares to the public. So they raised probably about 1.8 billion TT, almost 2 billion, from those two additional offerings. So they've been using those things to sort of offset their own budgetary shortfalls. We also have about $8 billion US in foreign exchange reserves, which is about 8 or 9 months thereabout of import cover. And Trinidad remains the country in the Caribbean, the country in the Caribbean with the largest amount of import cover relative to all the other territories. So we have buffers in place. The challenge is that you really don't want to have to get to a point where you're drawing down on those buffers too frequently, because then those buffers will eventually run out if they're not being replenished. So what the government is doing from a fiscal perspective is they're trying to reduce their expenditure in the economy and manage their own household. I think that the effects of that are beginning to spread through the rest of the economy as well, where citizens are taking greater stock of themselves financially as well. Because like I said, you have job losses. It's not a pretty situation, but it's not a situation that cannot be managed, or it's not a situation that has gone beyond the point of saving.
Now, I know that when the economy is unstable, the business community tends to react with fear. What's happening in terms of business confidence right now?
Right. So it's not where it should be, but the interesting thing is that even though the businesses are having a hard time, I would say it's less economic and more social. The main thing with businesses right now is the effect of crime on businesses. So certainly the businesses, their revenues aren't what they were before, obviously, because the economy is flat. Also, a lot of businesses are having a hard time accessing foreign exchange, which is really a challenge in TNT right now, access to foreign exchange. There just isn't as much foreign exchange in circulation as there was, let's say, 10 years ago. And the demand is still there because, as you may or may not know from economics, when you get to a point where you have a society that has grown accustomed to a particular standard of living, it's very hard to break that. So the demand for foreign exchange is kind of like a built-in demand right now, right? But the business confidence is not where it was, but I don't think that the economy per se is the main factor for that. I think that has already been factored in because this is not the first year that we're here. We've been here since 2015, right? So the businesses have factored that. The real issue for businesses right now is just the impact of crime on commerce in TNT.
Now, is there anything else you'd like to add, Andre?
Yeah, I'd like to say that we're expecting a mild pickup in the last quarter of the year because of the new gas that's coming on stream. So there was a platform that was constructed called the Juniper platform, which goes out on a BP field, and they're going to be pulling gas from that. So that's going to help us a little bit. The budget is coming up in September, which is always an interesting time for the society. We expect that the government is going to do more cuts. We expect that they're going to reduce subsidies and transfers a lot more, which, in my opinion, I think is a step in the right direction. Because the reality of the situation is that the government just does not have the revenues as they did. So the budget is coming up, which is always interesting. And I am pretty confident that we can ride the storm out if everybody works together and focuses on the national interest. It's very easy for people to focus on their own interests, but at a time like this, really, I think the country needs to focus on the national interest to get the best outcome.
Well, thank you for joining me on This Week Abroad, Andre.
Andrew, it was my pleasure. Anytime.
We go further abroad in a bit, but first, a look at how some of the major international commodities ended trading this week. Caution seemed to be the catchword in oil markets overnight. In terms of natural gas, prices are weak on high production and low consumption. Corn recorded slow movement in the week, while wheat noticed its biggest weekly decline since the summer of 2016. Gold price provided negative trading in light of the strengthening US dollar, but a positive opening is expected next week. When we come back, Chinese politician ousted from government for his involvement in corruption. International stories are on the next side of this break. Stay with us. Welcome back to This Week Abroad. China's Communist Party has been left stunned by the downfall of one of its rising stars, just months ahead of a national leadership shakeup. Al Jazeera's Rob McBride has more.
The dismissal has left this city of more than 30 million people in shock. Seen here on the right, Sun Jun-sai found that being Communist Party Secretary of Chongqing was no protection, becoming one of the highest profile victims of President Xi Jinping's crackdown on corruption.
No one would be free from the principle of the party. I think if he is against the rules and regulations for the party, he will be punished. It is very clear.
In the most recent gathering of senior Communist Party members, Sun is conspicuously absent. A search of him on the state-run TV's picture library draws a blank. For the people of Chongqing, it recalls the fate of Sun's predecessor in the top job, Bo Xilai. Bo was also seen as a rising star in the party, but his maverick style was too much for the party leadership, and he was imprisoned in 2013 in one of the biggest political scandals in decades. Sun Jun-sai probably suspected his days were numbered when a report by anti-corruption inspectors earlier this year accused him of not doing enough to eradicate Bo Xilai's legacy, regarded by Communist Party bosses as a dangerous influence. Still, for many people in Chongqing, Bo is remembered with a fondness that can't be shaken, even several years after he was jailed. Bo Xilai is credited with building affordable housing and turbocharging the local economy. And embarrassingly for the party perhaps, figures just out show Chongqing is still China's fastest growing city.
Many old people in Chongqing miss him. He did many things that were good.
He did many practical things for people, like infrastructure, and he made things safer in the city.
The controversy comes as China prepares for the 5-yearly Autumn Congress, which will choose the next generation of leaders. And Sun's political demise is taken as evidence that Xi is firmly in control of that process, deciding who is in and who is out. But as Chongqing has shown, controlling the legacies they leave behind is a lot harder. Rob McBride, Al Jazeera, Chongqing.
Workers at Nissan's assembly plant in Mississippi are voting on whether to be represented by a union. It's the culmination of a 14-year-long battle for labor organization at the plant. Many multinational corporations have moved their operations to southern U.S. to keep wages low. And Nissan has been fighting the union drive with an intensity that some workers say may have broken the law. More in this Al Jazeera report from Canton, Mississippi.
All 45 Nissan plants around the world are unionized, except this one in Canton, Mississippi, and only 2 others also in the deep south of the US. But that may soon change when workers at Canton vote on whether to join the United Auto Workers Union. Nissan says there's no need for labor organization. It pays a steady wage and has a, quote, direct relationship with the 4,000 workers eligible to vote. These workers disagree.
I gotta be able to have a say in your benefits and your pay and just treatment, safety.
It's like we're in a relationship, but we're tired of it being an abusive relationship.
Union supporters say Nissan is intimidating workers to vote no. The UAW has complained to regulators that Nissan is breaking the law. Workers say videos like this one play on a loop throughout the plant, warning against a union. Mandatory meetings are held where employees are told the UAW is corrupt, and supervisors wear vote no t-shirts supplied by the car manufacturer.
That's very intimidating for them to really, kind of like is violating our right to choose.
Nissan declined to be interviewed or even let us into their plant, but they did supply us with the name of a supervisor who's against unionization.
Rights. We have labor laws.
As a manager, Kim Bailey isn't eligible to vote, but she says her vote no t-shirt is simply part of the debate. And while Nissan isn't allowed to threaten the closure of the plant if the workers unionize, the possibility is on her mind.
We're in Mississippi. We have jobs, but jobs are very limited.
Is there a sense, though, that it's just not worth the risk?
Me personally, I don't think it is.
Mississippi's history has made this struggle even more raw as the overwhelmingly African-American workforce votes.
Nissan, to me, represents the old South. By any means necessary, we're going to oppress you, going to keep you down, and we will benefit by keeping you keeping you down, keeping you without representation, keeping you from voting. And if you have to vote, we're going to put fear in you. The only difference now, they don't put white sheets on right around your house, but,
Dr. Jackson wonders if Nissan really would desert Canton, given its deal with authorities in this, the US's poorest state, that gives it an estimated $1.3 billion in subsidies from the state and county and no requirement to pay local taxes for 30 years. If Nissan workers do vote yes, it will be a powerful challenge to a global corporate model that attempts to undermine worker organization, particularly in an impoverished region, with the promise of job security. Shihab Ratansi, Al Jazeera, Canton, Mississippi.
The EU says there is no further need for emergency funding since refugee flows from Turkey have slowed. The bloc is paying Greek authorities to take over services instead. But many aid groups say Greece is unprepared and refugees may lose access to vital services. Al Jazeera's Lawrence Lee reports from the Greek island of Chios.
This is the last lunch the Norwegian Refugee Council will be able to provide. Every day, month after month, without fanfare, they have fed these families, but no longer. The European Union has pulled its funding, so the NRC is pulling out with no little bitterness.
Well, we're not pleased, and the only reason we're leaving is because our funding has been cut. But our main concern is that the needs of the people here are met and covered, and that no gaps arise.
30 metres away, the volunteers from Doctors of the World are doing an examination in the van that passes for a surgery. They have lost their funding too, but have scraped together money from elsewhere to limp on until Christmas. Like every aid worker we spoke to, they're worried that people suffering things like deep trauma may not be looked after in the future.
There are 3 problems when the NGOs leave: the well-being of refugees, medical care and psychological help. There are many traumatized people here and they need a lot of help.
So this is Suda Camp, a miserable collection of tents hidden from view in a medieval moat. About 500 here. Another 3,000 at a more menacing-looking facility inland and elsewhere. Hundreds still come to the islands every month, but the EU thinks things are getting better. Politically, this is a significant moment because it is, in effect, The European Union saying that it believes the refugee crisis in the Aegean Sea is over. By implication, that also suggests that the EU believes that its deal with Turkey to keep the refugees out of the European Union is holding up and will continue to do so. In the immediate term, the food will be provided by an American evangelical Christian group. Jobs have been advertised in the local hospital for more doctors. But the fear is that replacement services won't happen quickly enough, or at all.
For the time being, the capacities of the hospital have been limited, but they are now recruiting additional staff, including psychologists and psychiatrists. We hope that they will be able to find the staff.
The EU may claim things are changing, but the tiny distance between these islands and Turkey isn't. As of now, Greece is in no position to look after these people without the help of specialists from the outside, and that's without the migration flows increasing again. Soon, though, it will have to. Lawrence Lee, Al Jazeera, Chios.
That's it for This Week Abroad. Thanks for joining us. We're back next week with more regional and international stories. But remember to catch BATV News weeknight at 7:30 p.m. I'm Andrew Laidley. Pleasant viewing.